The gravel lot outside the old dairy barn was full of trucks that morning. 7 of them, parked at odd angles, engines still ticking as they cooled. A dozen people stood near the open barn door, in small, quiet clusters, arms crossed against the cold, breath fogging in the early light. Nobody was talking much. They were just staring inside, at something none of them had expected to find on a farm they'd already written off as a lost cause. Dana Whitfield stood in the doorway of the barn she had bought 11 months earlier, work gloves still on, boots caked with dried mud, dust clinging to her jacket. Behind her, in a building most of this town had quietly agreed was beyond saving, was the reason half the county had shown up before 8 in the morning. One of the men near the fence line, a heavy-set farmer in a canvas coat, shook his head slowly. "I did not see that coming," he said, mostly to himself. Nobody argued with him. But to understand why this discovery mattered, you have to go back 1 year, to the day Dana Whitfield signed the papers on a farm nobody else wanted. The Bauer farm sat on 96 acres at the edge of the county, the kind of property real estate listings describe as full of potential, when what they really mean is full of problems. The farmhouse needed a new roof. The pastures had gone to thistle, sumac, and knee-high brush. And the dairy barn, the long, low building where 3 generations of one family had once milked well over 100 cows a day, stood with its paint peeling in long grey strips and its equipment rusting exactly where it had been left, untouched, for the better part of a decade. The Bauers had run that dairy since the 1940s. Elmer Bauer, the last of them to work it, kept the operation going into his 70s, milking by lantern light in the winter, the way his father had taught him. When he had a stroke 8 years ago, there was no one left to take over. His daughter had moved into town decades before, with no interest in the schedule of a working dairy. The farm was sold to an out-of-state investment group that never once set foot on the property, and the barn had simply sat there ever since, gathering dust, pigeons, and rumor. Dana was 34, and she wasn't a farmer by trade, at least not officially. For 9 years she'd worked as a field technician for a regional dairy cooperative, driving from operation to operation, testing milk quality, inspecting equipment, and talking shop with farmers running herds 10 times the size of anything she could ever hope to own herself. She understood the rhythm of a working dairy the way someone understands a language they've listened to for years without ever quite speaking it themselves. She knew what a well-run barn should sound like, smell like, and look like at 5 in the morning. What she hadn't done was run one from the inside. Her connection to the work ran deeper than her job title, though. Her grandfather had milked 40 cows on a farm 2 counties over until she was 12, and some of her clearest childhood memories were standing on an overturned bucket beside him in a barn that smelled like hay, diesel, and warm milk. That farm was sold and subdivided after he passed. She never got the chance to see it again. So when the Bauer property came up for a price that made her co-workers laugh out loud, she didn't laugh. She drove out on a Sunday afternoon, walked the barn alone, and stood a long time looking at the empty stalls and the silent milking line. She didn't see a ruin. She saw a building with good bones, buried under years of neglect, and a shot, however small, at getting back a piece of the life she'd lost once already. She put in almost everything she'd saved, plus a modest agricultural loan with a monthly payment that would keep her up more nights than she wanted to admit. And she bought it. Word travels fast in a small farming community, and most of what traveled about Dana's purchase wasn't kind. Roy Callahan farmed the land next door. 400 acres of corn and soybeans that had been in his family almost as long as the Bauer place had been in theirs. He wasn't a cruel man. He was the kind of neighbor who'd pull your truck out of a ditch at midnight without being asked twice. But he had strong opinions about the dairy operation going in next door, and he didn't keep them to himself. That barn hasn't had a working cow in it for 8 years. he told her the first week, leaning on her fence with the patience of a man who'd watched a lot of newcomers make a lot of expensive mistakes. Dairy's not something you pick up from a manual. Feed costs alone will eat that loan before your first winter's out. He wasn't being unkind for its own sake. He genuinely believed she'd underestimated what she was taking on, and in more than a few ways, he wasn't wrong. There was also Harlan Reyes, a retired equipment mechanic who'd spent 30 years servicing dairy barns across 3 counties, including the Bauer place back when it was still running at full capacity. Harlan was quieter than Roy, more curious than skeptical, and he became, without either of them quite deciding it, something like Dana's unofficial advisor. He'd stop by every couple of weeks, look over whatever she was working on, and offer advice in a way that never once felt like charity. Elmer ran a tight operation, Harlan told her once, standing in the old milking parlor with his hands in his coveralls. Man didn't waste a thing, and he didn't build a thing without a reason. If something in this barn looks strange to you, there's usually a reason for that too. Might just take a while to find out what it is. She didn't think much of the comment at the time. She would later. The work itself was slow, physical, and almost never glamorous, the kind of labor a camera crew would edit down to 30 seconds, but that actually ate up entire seasons of her life. Her first month was spent clearing brush from the pastures, pulling rusted fence wire out of ground that had grown around it, and hauling decades of accumulated junk out of the barn. Collapsed pallets, a broken hay elevator, feed bags long since chewed through by mice. She learned, by trial and error, how to patch a water line after flooding the lower pasture twice. She learned which of the old stanchions could be sandblasted and reused, and which had rusted past saving. She spent an entire weekend on her hands and knees, scrubbing out a feed room that hadn't been cleaned since the Bauers left, using nothing but a wire brush, a shop vacuum, and stubbornness. And she cried once, quietly, alone in her truck, after a roofing contractor quoted her nearly double what she'd budgeted to fix the section over the hayloft. There were real setbacks, not the manufactured kind. The first came in early spring, when a storm tore a length of flashing off the barn's north side, sending water down through the loft floor and into the stalls below. It took 3 days and money she didn't have to get it patched before the damage spread further. The second came when she brought in a small herd of dairy goats, hoping for early income while she worked toward rebuilding a proper cattle operation. She'd underestimated how much fencing goats actually need. Within 2 weeks, half of them had wandered straight through a weak line and onto Roy's cornfield. He wasn't thrilled. Neither was she. Standing in the barn that night, tired and short on cash, she asked herself the question she'd been avoiding for weeks. Had she made a mistake? She didn't have an answer yet, but she kept working anyway, because stopping wasn't really a plan. The first strange thing she noticed was a section of the barn's concrete floor, near the old feed room, that didn't quite match the rest. Most of the floor was a uniform grey, poured sometime in the 1960s when the Bauers modernized the parlor. But this one section, roughly 6 feet square, had a slightly different texture, and a faint seam ran around its border, like a patch job someone had rushed and never finished properly. She mentioned it to Harlan on one of his visits. He crouched down, ran a thumb along the seam, and frowned in a way that told her he was actually thinking, not just being polite. "Huh," he said. "Didn't know that was there." The second clue turned up while she was clearing out the farmhouse attic and found an old ledger, its pages brittle and water-stained. Most of the entries were routine: feed costs, milk yields, veterinary bills going back to the 1950s. But one line, dated 1958, mentioned repairs to something called the deep room, a phrase that appeared nowhere else in the book and that Dana had never heard used to describe any part of a working dairy barn before. The third clue came from Elmer Bauer's daughter, Carol, whom Dana tracked down through a mutual acquaintance and invited out for coffee. Carol was in her 60s now, living 2 hours away, and hadn't set foot on the property in years. When Dana mentioned the strange patch in the barn floor, Carol went quiet for a moment before answering. "My grandfather used to talk about something under that barn," she said slowly, turning her coffee cup in her hands. "I always figured it was just an old man's story. He said his father built something down there, to keep the milk cold, back before they had real refrigeration. I never saw it myself. I don't think Dad ever showed a soul." That was the moment the vague curiosity turned into something Dana couldn't stop thinking about. It took Dana 3 weekends to work up the nerve and to gather the tools, to open the patched section of floor. Underneath the newer layer of concrete, she and Harlan found an older, cruder pour, hand-mixed by the look of it, with a rusted metal ring set into its center, the kind used to lift a heavy cover. Harlan helped her pry it loose, bringing, in his own words, way too much curiosity for a man my age. When they finally lifted the cover free, the air that rose up was cool, mineral, and faintly of wet stone, not the smell of anything spoiled or dangerous, but the smell of somewhere that had simply been sealed away from the world for a long time. Below was a narrow stone stairway, cut down into the bedrock beneath the barn. At first, Dana assumed she was looking at an old root cellar, a common enough feature on farms built before modern storage. But as her flashlight swept the walls, she saw something a root cellar never would have needed. A long stone trough running along one wall, fed by a thin channel of water trickling in from somewhere deeper in the rock, and a row of shelves clearly built to hold something specific. Old 10-gallon milk cans, several of which were still sitting exactly where they'd been left. Harlan stood at the bottom of the steps for a long moment before he spoke. "I'll be damned," he said quietly. "It's a spring house, cut right into the rock." He explained what she was looking at, and it's worth explaining here too, because this is where the story stops being just a personal one and becomes a small piece of real agricultural history. Long before electric refrigeration reached most rural farms, dairies depended on natural cold springs to keep milk from spoiling in the hours between morning and evening milking. A spring house channeled a steady flow of cold groundwater through a stone or concrete trough, and milk cans were set directly into that moving water, which stayed at a near-constant, refrigerator-cold temperature regardless of the season above ground. It was a low-tech solution, but a remarkably effective one, and it kept countless small dairies in business decades before the rural electrical grid reached them. Many farms across the country once had one. Very few of them survive intact. What made this particular spring house remarkable wasn't only that it had survived, it was the engineering behind it. The spring feeding the trough had been carefully channeled through a hand-cut stone conduit that, after more than 70 years without a single repair, still ran clear and cold. Whoever built it understood the hillside's geology well enough to tap a spring that never failed and never froze, and had even built a simple overflow channel to keep the chamber from flooding during wet seasons. A small detail, but one that only someone who'd studied the land closely would have thought to include. Tucked into a dry alcove near the entrance, wrapped in oilcloth that had somehow kept most of the moisture out, they found a second find, a small wooden box holding hand-drawn diagrams of the spring house's construction, dated 1931, along with a short, handwritten account of why it had been built. The signature at the bottom read simply, H. Bauer, Elmer's grandfather, the man who had first put down roots on that land. Dana called the County Agricultural Extension Office the following week, curious whether the spring house had any real modern use, or whether it was simply an interesting piece of history to preserve as is. What she got back was more than she expected. An extension specialist who came out to inspect the site confirmed that the spring's flow rate and temperature had remained remarkably stable over the decades, and that with a few modest, low-cost updates, the system could genuinely be brought back into limited use. Not as a replacement for modern refrigeration, but as a supplemental cooling method that could meaningfully cut her energy costs during the warmer months, which mattered a great deal to a small operation working with a tight budget. That was the practical value. The deeper significance took a little longer to settle in. H. Bauer's handwritten account described building the spring house during the hardest years of the Depression, when he couldn't afford proper refrigeration and needed a way to keep milk from spoiling before it reached the local creamery. He wrote that he'd studied the hillside for the better part of a season before choosing exactly where to dig, and that he'd wanted something that would outlast me and cost nothing to run once it was built. Reading those words inside the barn where 3 generations of his family had worked, Dana understood something she hadn't fully grasped before. She hadn't simply bought a rundown property with good bones. She had inherited an unfinished piece of someone else's determination, a problem one farmer had solved with almost nothing but patience, observation, and stone, sitting quietly beneath her feet the entire time she'd been lying awake, wondering if she'd made a mistake. Word moved through the county, the way it always does in a small community, one conversation at a time, until it seemed like half the farms nearby had heard about the spring house under the old Bauer barn. Roy came by on a Saturday morning, hands in his coat pockets, and stood at the top of the stone stairway, looking down for a long while without saying much. "I've farmed next to this place my whole life," he finally admitted. "Never once knew that was down there." He didn't apologize exactly. That wasn't really his way. But before he left that day, he offered to help her repair a stretch of fence line the following weekend. And coming from Roy, that offer meant more than any speech could have. Carol drove out the next week to see it in person for the first time, and stood at the bottom of the steps with one hand pressed against the cold stone wall her great-grandfather had built, quiet for a long moment before she said a word. Harlan, for his part, mostly just looked satisfied. The way a man looks when a hunch he'd carried around for 30 years finally pays off. The local historical society asked to document the site properly. A handful of dairy farmers from nearby towns came out just to see it for themselves, drawn less by novelty and more by a genuine professional respect for what an earlier generation had managed to build with almost nothing. Nobody threw a parade. Nobody needed to. The town's opinion of Dana shifted the way most honest opinions shift, quietly, one conversation at a time, until it had simply changed. That same spring, weeks after the last of the crowds had come and gone, Dana stood alone in the barn doorway at sunrise, the same spot where she'd stood that morning, with half the county watching. The stalls behind her held a small but growing herd. The spring house below the floor ran cold and steady, doing exactly what it had been built to do nearly a century earlier. The roof no longer leaked. The fences held. None of it had come easily, and she knew there was still a long way to go before the farm was fully back on its feet. But standing there, in a barn everyone had told her was a waste of money, she understood something no amount of experience could have taught her ahead of time. Sometimes the value of old farmland isn't obvious right away. Sometimes it's buried under years of neglect, waiting for someone stubborn enough or hopeful enough to look past what a place has become and ask what it once was, and what it could still be. Have you ever bought, inherited, or taken on something everyone else had already written off? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and whether you've ever found yourself in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Farmland Files for more real, grounded stories of the people bringing forgotten farms back to life.